The sun was warm over the Westfield Elementary schoolyard, but the heat did little to melt the isolation around Jorain Caldwell. He sat alone near the far edge of the pavement, close to the rusted chain-link fence, his shoulders hunched and his hands covering his face. His blue backpack lay discarded beside him, books spilling out. Around him, distant laughter filled the air, but none of it belonged to him. None of it ever did. Jorain had the quiet strength of someone who had endured more than most kids his age. His light hair fell across his forehead in uneven strands, and his gray hoodie clung to him like armor. He wasn't the kind of boy who cried easily, not where people could see. But this time it had all been too much. The whispers, the shoved books, the muttered insults. He wasn't like the others, and they never let him forget it. A group of boys stood not far behind him, watching him in a strange mix of guilt and detachment. None dared to approach. One of them mumbled something, but it faded into silence when a sudden clang tore through the air. Everyone turned their heads toward the fence, just in time to see a large German shepherd leap over the top. The dog landed with startling grace and authority. His paws struck the ground hard, his body low and alert. His coat, black and tan, caught the sunlight, and a faint breeze shifted the fur around his broad neck. The yard went quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. The dog scanned the playground with sharp, intelligent eyes before locking onto the small, trembling figure near the fence. Maxabeth approached slowly, his steps measured. There was no fear in his body language, only purpose. He stopped in front of Jorain and sat down, calm but watchful. Then, after a beat of stillness, he nudged the boy's arm gently with his snout. Jorain blinked, looked up, and met the animal's gaze. For a long second, the world faded away. Jorain hesitated, then reached out and placed a shaking hand on the dog's fur. It was warm, solid, real, a comfort no human had offered in weeks. Then came a flicker of silver, a tag on the dog's collar. Scratched but legible, retired K9. And in that moment, without knowing why, Jorain Caldwell felt something shift deep inside him. He wasn't alone anymore. The schoolyard was still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate as Jorain Caldwell remained kneeling beside the German shepherd, his fingers resting gently on the dog's thick fur. Around them, the other children watched with a mixture of confusion, awe, and fear. No one moved, as if something sacred had taken shape right there on the pavement. Maxabeth didn't bark, didn't flinch. He simply sat, eyes locked on the crowd like a silent sentinel. A teacher's voice finally broke the spell. "Jorain, step away from the dog, sweetheart." It was Marvelane Crow, the school counselor, her usual calm edged now with concern. She took cautious steps forward, her eyes fixed on Maxabeth. "We don't know where he came from." But Jorain didn't move. "He's not going to hurt me," he said softly, almost like he was convincing himself. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. Not with fear, but with something else. A pull. Connection. Marvelane hesitated. She'd seen Jorain withdrawn, anxious, unreachable for months. But now the boy looked different, present, like he was being seen for the first time by this dog. She lowered her voice. "Honey, we just need to be sure he's safe." Jorain nodded. "He's a retired K9. Look." He held up the silver tag still dangling from Maxabeth's collar. It was old, scratched, but clearly marked, retired, K9 unit. Below that, barely visible, a number was etched in faint digits. #0917LK. Inside the office, Davenel Granger, the school principal, typed the number into an old state database at Marvelane's request. It took less than a minute for the information to load. Maxabeth German Shepherd, male, 10 years old. Former service dog with LA County K9 unit. Retired due to injury. Handler, deceased. Davenel paused. No listed owner. No known residents. He blinked slowly. How did he even get here? Outside, Jorain ran his hand down Maxabeth's side, feeling the faint ridges of old scars beneath the fur. "He found me," he whispered. The children behind him slowly dispersed, their curiosity dissolving into whispers. Some of them glanced back, but no one said anything more. Something about Maxibeth's presence demanded respect and mystery. That night, the district sent animal control to collect Maxibeth. But when they arrived, the dog vanished. No one saw him leave. No broken fence. No open gates. Just gone. Jorain waited near the school entrance long after the sky had turned purple and the streetlights hummed to life. He felt it in his chest. Maxibeth wasn't gone. He was watching, waiting, and when Jorain turned to walk home, the faint sound of paws echoed behind him. The next morning, Jorain Caldwell woke before the alarm. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying the moment Maxibeth disappeared. Silently, completely, like a shadow vanishing into deeper night. Still, part of him hoped he'd find the dog waiting outside, maybe at the end of the driveway or under the old oak tree near the sidewalk. But there was nothing, just the soft chirping of birds and the hum of distant traffic. His mother, Raffelin Mercer, watched him from the kitchen, her eyes searching his face. She noticed the way he walked differently, more alert, as if something inside him had been rewired overnight. "You okay?" she asked, placing a plate of toast in front of him. Jorain nodded. "I'm fine." She didn't press. She rarely did. But something in his voice made her glance toward the window, as if she too expected something just beyond the glass. At school, the usual stares and whispers followed Jorain down the hallway, but they felt weaker now, as if dulled by the weight of what had happened. The other kids weren't sure how to treat him. Was he weird? Lucky? Protected? One of the boys who'd pushed him the day before even avoided eye contact. A small shift, but Jorain noticed. He walked with quieter confidence, like Maxibeth's presence still lingered somewhere behind his steps. During recess, Jorain wandered toward the fence again. He sat in the same spot, back to the metal links, eyes scanning the distance. The grass rustled gently, and for a second he thought he saw movement. His heart jumped, but it was just a bird. Disappointed, he pulled his knees close, resting his chin on them. Then a soft thud echoed behind him. Not loud, barely audible, but distinct. He turned sharply. There, by the far edge of the building, half hidden in shadow, stood Maxibeth. He looked exactly as before. Calm, grounded, eyes sharp. But there was something else now. Around his neck, tied to the collar, was a folded piece of fabric. A torn handkerchief. Faded initials stitched in red thread were barely legible. L.H. Jorain's brow furrowed. It wasn't there before. He stood, slowly, and approached the dog. Maxibeth didn't move. He waited, patient, like he wanted Jorain to see, to understand. And as Jorain reached for the fabric, a strange chill ran through him. L.H., those initials stirred something. A memory, a name long buried. And for the first time, Jorain wondered if Maxibeth's return wasn't a coincidence, but a message. The fabric felt older than it looked. Worn but carefully stitched, the handkerchief tied around Maxibeth's collar trembled slightly in the breeze. Jorain Caldwell turned it over in his hands, his fingers brushing the fading red embroidery. L.H. The initials seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, like something sacred. The stitching was uneven, human, clearly handmade. Someone had cared enough to preserve this. But who? That afternoon, Jorain brought the handkerchief to the school library. Few students used the archives in the back, a small, dusty corner of forgotten yearbooks and local records. But Jorain wasn't like most students. He traced through the shelves with care until his eyes landed on a binder labeled Community Officers, Westfield. Inside, he found pages of newspaper clippings and school newsletters. His heart skipped when he saw a photograph from 2014. A younger Maxibeth, alert and proud beside a tall woman in uniform. Underneath the photo, the caption read, Lieutenant Lucinder Halden and K9 Maxibeth, 2014, local heroes retire together. Lucinder Halden, L.H. Jorain stared at the name, chills running across his arms. The woman in the photo had stern eyes, but a kind smile. She looked like someone who had seen too much and kept going anyway. But according to the note beside the image, she had passed away 4 years earlier. The article didn't say how, just that her service was honored quietly. There were no relatives mentioned, no survivors. He returned the binder carefully and walked back into the daylight, the name echoing in his mind. Lucinda Halden. Was this her handkerchief? Had she meant for it to find its way back into the world through Maxibeth? And why now? Why with him? Jorane's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice, calm, smooth, and always precise. Strange place to find a kid like you. It was Davenal Granger, the school principal. He stood near the library steps, holding a steaming mug. You've been spending a lot of time with shadows lately, he said gently, his eyes scanning the fabric in Jorane's hands. Where'd you find that? Jorane hesitated, unsure how much to say. It was tied to Maxibeth's collar this morning, he answered. Davenal raised a brow. Maxibeth? He whispered, as if the name carried weight. And it did. Davenal stared into the distance for a long time before speaking again. Lucinda was more than an officer, he said quietly. She was the kind of person who believed nothing was random, not even loss. Then he looked at Jorane. If that dog came back to you carrying something of hers, you might want to ask what you're supposed to remember. And Jorane realized this wasn't just a mystery. It was the beginning of something buried deep that now demanded to be uncovered. That night, Jorane sat at the edge of his bed, the room dim except for the soft glow of his desk lamp. The handkerchief was laid out neatly in front of him, and beside it, a printout of the article he'd found about Lucinda Halden. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Maxibeth had brought him more than a relic from the past. He'd brought a question, one Jorane didn't yet know how to ask. Downstairs, his mother Raffelin Mercer was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. Through the floorboards, her voice sounded muffled, but something in her tone made Jorane pause. She hadn't said much about the dog. In fact, she'd barely reacted when he mentioned the initials. She just went quiet, like a stone dropped in deep water. He leaned closer to the vent, trying to hear. He shouldn't be remembering this, she whispered. Not yet. Jorane's breath caught. Remembering, his mind raced. Did she know something? Something about Lucinda? About Maxibeth? He crept down the stairs, silent on the wood, just in time to hear her say another name, Jorane Granger. He froze. Granger, like Davenal Granger, the principal. His pulse quickened. That wasn't his name. Not anymore. Before he could ask, there was a sharp knock at the front door. His mother startled and hung up quickly, smoothing her shirt as she opened it. Standing on the porch under the dim porch light was a tall woman in a dark coat. Elegant posture, sharp eyes. I'm looking for Jorane Caldwell, she said calmly. Or perhaps, Jorane Granger. The name struck like lightning. Who are you? Raffelin asked, her voice clipped. The woman stepped forward. My name is Andrelia Voss. I was Lucinda Halden's legal executor. Her eyes fell on Jorane, who stood frozen behind his mother. I believe the boy may be in possession of something that once belonged to her. Raffelin blocked the doorway. He's not involved in this anymore, she said firmly. He doesn't remember. Andrelia's gaze didn't waver. He will. Jorane pushed past his mother, heart pounding. Why did Maxibeth come to me? He asked. His voice cracked. Why now? Andrelia studied him for a long moment before answering. Because Lucinda made sure he would, when you were ready. And at that moment, something inside Jorane clicked, like a door that had always been there, finally unlocking. The living room was silent, thick with the weight of what had just been said. Jorane Caldwell sat on the edge of the couch, hands clenched tightly around the handkerchief. Across from him, Andrelia Voss stood tall, her coat still wet from the misty night. His mother, Raffelin, hovered behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight. No one spoke at first. Andrelia had dropped a truth like a stone into water, and they were all still watching the ripples. She left something for you, Andrelia said finally. Lucinder. Her voice softened. She never had children, but she saw something in you. A resemblance. A thread she couldn't ignore. Raflin interrupted. Sharp. She should have stayed away. We agreed. But Andrelia didn't flinch. You agreed. She didn't. She pulled a small envelope from her coat pocket and placed it on the coffee table. Jorain stared at it. On the front, in elegant cursive, was his real name, Jorain Granger. He felt like the floor tilted beneath him. Why that name? He asked, his voice trembling. Why would she call me that? Andrelia's expression shifted. Not pity, not sympathy, just quiet honesty. Because you were born with it. The room spun. Raflin sat down beside him, hands shaking. We changed it when you were little, she said, finally breaking the silence. After everything. After Lucinder left the force. She tried to protect you in her own way. But the truth was too heavy. And I tried to bury it. Jorain opened the envelope with slow, careful hands. Inside was a photo, faded, slightly torn. It showed a young Lucinder holding a baby, and beside her stood a man in uniform. His features were unmistakable. Jorain's own eyes stared back at him from the man's face. On the back of the photo, a note in looping handwriting. For when the silence breaks, love always L. His fingers trembled. Was he my father? He whispered. Raflin nodded. Lucinder's brother, Nathriel Quinn. Her voice cracked. He died before you turned 2. She was the only family left. Jorain looked down at the photo again, at the way Maxibeth had been sitting between them even then. All this time, the dog hadn't just been protecting him. He had been leading him back home. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Jorain Caldwell, or Jorain Granger as the letter called him, lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the photo clutched in one hand. Everything he thought he knew about himself had shifted in the space of a single conversation. His last name, his history, the woman he'd never met, yet who'd left a trail of breadcrumbs right to his feet, and the dog who carried her silence like a soldier carries memory. When morning came, Jorain didn't speak during breakfast. His mother watched him closely but gave him space, maybe for the first time in his life. Outside, the neighborhood felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just older, like it had always known something he hadn't. As he stepped outside, his heart jolted. Maxibeth sat at the edge of the sidewalk, calm, tail curled neatly over his paws. The handkerchief was still tied to his collar, but now, another item hung beneath it. A small bronze pendant, round and worn, engraved with the same initials. Jorain approached slowly. You knew, he said aloud, though the dog didn't move. You knew all along. He crouched beside him, running his hand along Maxibeth's neck. You were waiting for me to be ready. Maxibeth blinked once, his golden eyes full of something Jorain couldn't quite name. Not intelligence, exactly, but recognition. Trust. He felt it in his chest, low and steady, the way you feel thunder before it arrives. At school, the world seemed quieter. The kids who used to whisper and laugh kept their distance now, like something about Jorain had shifted. Not fear, more like respect. Even Davenel Granger, who always seemed unreadable, gave him a long, knowing glance as Jorain passed his office. Neither of them said a word, but something unspoken passed between them. A shared history. Blood, maybe. After classes, Jorain slipped away to the old library again. In the far back, behind the forgotten shelves, he found a cardboard box marked Halden Personal Effects. Dust clung to the lid. Inside were old notebooks, badges, and tucked deep beneath them, a sealed envelope labeled, for JG, when he's ready. He opened it with trembling hands. The letter inside wasn't long, but every word struck like a match in the dark. If Maxibeth found you, then you've begun to remember. You are more than what was hidden from you, and you are not alone. Lucinder. Jorain folded the letter, holding it to his chest. The silence was gone now, and something inside him was finally waking up. The letter from Lucinder lived in Jorain's jacket pocket now. He carried it like a compass, not always reading it but always feeling its weight. The words weren't instructions. They were something deeper, a calling. And each time he traced the worn paper with his fingers, he felt like a piece of him that had been silent for years was now trying to speak. That weekend, Raffelin finally sat down with him at the kitchen table. The light was soft through the window, and her eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from holding a truth too long. "I didn't keep it from you because I didn't love you," she said. "I kept it from you because I didn't know how to help you carry it." Jorain didn't interrupt. He let her speak. "Lucinder wasn't perfect. But when your father died, she took that pain and turned it into purpose. She trained Maxibeth. She trained herself. And she never stopped protecting what mattered, especially you." Jorain's throat tightened. "She knew I'd forget her?" he asked. Raffelin nodded. "She knew the trauma would bury things. You were too young when it happened." He looked down. "Then why did she leave clues?" His mother hesitated. "Because one day she believed you'd need to remember who you are." Later that evening, as the sky turned a dusky blue, Jorain returned to the library with Maxibeth at his side. Together, they walked to a rarely used elevator near the archives, one only staff typically accessed. But Maxibeth stopped in front of it, staring at the buttons. Jorain pressed the basement level on instinct. The doors closed with a soft hiss, and as they descended, he felt a strange tension in the air. Not fear, but anticipation. The basement was cold and quiet, lined with old boxes and forgotten cabinets. At the far end of the room was a locked storage cage, rusted at the corners. But as Jorain approached, Maxibeth whined softly and nudged a dusty drawer nearby. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, was a leather journal. Faded gold lettering on the cover read, "NQ, Nathriel Quinn." Jorain opened it carefully. The first page held a photograph, Lucinder and Nathriel in uniform, standing beside Maxibeth as a puppy. And beneath it, a note scribbled in Nathriel's rough handwriting. "If anything happens to me, let the boy find this. Let him know where he comes from. Let him know we were more than just protectors, we were fighters for the forgotten." Jorain's eyes burned with emotion. Everything they'd hidden was being handed back to him, one piece at a time. And now he had to decide what to do with the truth. For the next few days, Jorain Granger walked with a different rhythm. Not faster, not slower, just more certain. The journal of Nathriel Quinn rarely left his side, and every page he read pulled back another layer of fog. Nathriel hadn't just been a soldier or a handler. He'd been a protector of people whose voices had been silenced, those forgotten by the system. And now Lucinder had passed that mission to him. Through Maxibeth, through memories, through blood. One entry stayed with him more than the others. It read, "This world doesn't need more watchers. It needs those who are willing to walk into the dark first." Jorain copied that phrase onto a note card and tucked it into his notebook. It echoed in his mind during classes, during lunch, and especially when he sat under the oak tree where he'd first wished for someone to see him. Now he was beginning to understand. He'd never been unseen, just waiting to see himself. Davenel Granger called him into the office that Friday afternoon. The man stood by the window, gazing out, his usual composure tinged with something gentler. "You've changed," he said. "You're not hiding anymore." Jorain nodded. "I'm starting to remember why." Davenel turned to him and placed a small metal pin on the desk, the faded insignia of the Westfield Community Patrol. Lucinder wore this when she wasn't in uniform. She said it reminded her that protection didn't require permission. Jorain picked up the pin slowly, feeling its cold metal against his palm. "What do I do with it?" Davenel smiled faintly. "You do what they did. You show up." That evening, under a silver sky and a breeze that carried the scent of dusk, Jorain stood near the school fence where Maxibeth had first appeared. The dog sat beside him, quiet and steady, eyes fixed forward. In the distance, younger students played, laughed, free of fear. A part of Jorain knew that was the point. Not just remembering, but protecting what came next. He knelt beside Maxibeth and fastened the old badge to the dog's collar, just below the handkerchief and pendant. "We're both carrying something now," he whispered. Maxibeth leaned into him slightly, eyes half closed, like he understood. From across the yard, Marvel Lane Crow watched with a hand over her heart. And not far behind, Andrelia Voss stood silently near the gate, watching it all unfold. Like Lucinder had planned this moment from the very beginning. Jorain rose, wind brushing through his hair, heart full, because the final step wasn't about remembering anymore. It was about becoming. The final Saturday of autumn came wrapped in a soft golden haze. Jorain Granger stood in the heart of the old community center, now reopened and filled with voices. Not just adults, but children too. The building, once abandoned, had been cleaned, painted, and filled with books, coats, food baskets. He didn't do it alone. The town came together, pulled by a quiet energy none could quite name. But it had started with him, and with a dog that jumped a school fence without warning. Maxibeth lay quietly at the back of the room, watching everything with his steady eyes. His badge shimmered faintly beneath the fabric tied around his neck. No longer just a retired K9, he had become something else entirely, a symbol of duty, of memory, of the unbroken thread between past and present. A few children approached him shyly, and he let them pet his ears, his tail thumping gently against the floor. Jorain spoke later that afternoon. Not loudly, not rehearsed, just honest. He told the story. Not all the pain, not every detail, but the heart of it. "We forget things sometimes," he said, looking at the group of faces around him, "because they hurt, or because we think we're too small to carry them. But some memories come back when you're ready, not to haunt you, but to guide you." He looked at Maxibeth. "And sometimes they walk on for legs." After the event, Andrelia Voss approached him with a small velvet box. Inside, a folded certificate bearing Lucinder Halden's signature, dated a year before her death. It named Jorain as the recipient of her private foundation scholarship, should he ever reclaim his name. "She never gave up on the idea of you," Andrelia said, voice soft. "Even when everyone else moved on." Jorain felt the tears coming but held them back, nodding in gratitude. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long amber shadows, Jorain walked the quiet path toward the schoolyard. Maxibeth followed beside him, each step echoing in calm rhythm. They stopped at the fence, the place where it all began. For a moment, Jorain knelt and whispered, "You brought me back to her, and to myself." Maxibeth nudged his shoulder gently, like he agreed. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just wind in the trees and the quiet breath of something sacred being fulfilled. And when they turned to walk home, the boy and the dog walked not as survivors of a story, but as keepers of it.